Hey y'all, Pete Cook here, and today I'm going to be sharing my American Lit project. It's my paper, and I'm making a video for Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights movement that he had. And I'm going to be naming a couple different key parts of that movement and how he used his power of language, which is what this assignment is about, and how he used that in one of his speeches. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about him and other people that he was associated with as well. So he was a well-known advocate for the 21st century, or the 20th century, for nonviolent social change. And he got a lot of his ideas and philosophies and morals from Mohandas Gandhi, which was a pacifist from India, and he's also commonly known as Mahatma Gandhi. And Mahatma in India, that means great soul. And what he did is he used massive nonviolent civil disobedience to gain a lot of support and help his movement go along to where he was fighting against tyranny and oppression over in India using civil disobedience and nonviolence. And so Martin Luther King Jr. got a lot of his ideas from Mahatma Gandhi. And another thing was Rosa Parks and the boycott, the bus, Montgomery boycott on the bus. She was told that, you can't sit up here with the whites. This is a white section, and of course this was a segregated bus. And so they told her, you can't sit here. You have to move. There's a white male who wants to sit in your seat, and you're not even supposed to be there in the first place. So you have to move to the back of the bus, or we're going to have to arrest you. And so she protested. She boycotted. And she decided, I'm not going to give up my seat for a white person anymore. And so she sat there, and they arrested her. And so that's kind of another part of where this civil rights movement starts off at. And so Martin Luther King Jr., he was born in Atlanta, Georgia in 1929. And he was known for his exceptional oratorical skills and his personal courage, which attracted a lot of national attention, and a lot of other civil rights activists. They were all arrested. He was arrested multiple times, and he wrote and spoke at organized nonviolent protests and mass demonstrations, and he drew a lot of attention to racial discrimination, segregation, and he demanded civil rights legislation. That way it would protect the rights of the African Americans and, bring some social equality to the African American people for once and for all. So, the March on Washington is where Martin Luther King Jr. gave his speech, I Have a Dream. And so it says in 1963 in Birmingham, Alabama, King guided peaceful mass demonstrations that the white police force countered with police dogs and fire hoses, creating a controversy which generated newspaper deadlines throughout the world. Subsequent mass demonstrations in many communities culminated in a march that attracted more than 250,000 protesters to Washington, D.C., where King delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech, in which he envisioned a world where people were no longer divided by race or segregated, and there was social equality. And so that was the March on Washington that I just read about, told you about. And it's kind of sad when you hear, you know, the white police force was using their police dogs on these people, and they were using fire hoses to try and get them off the streets and stop all this protesting, because they didn't like the African American people. They didn't want them to be with the whites. They didn't want any of that. It was just, that wasn't in the picture. Whites are superior to blacks, and that's how it was always going to be. That's how people thought of it. And so this movement that he inspired, Congress enacted the Civil Rights Act in 1964, the same year that King was honored with the Nobel Peace Prize. And he also was awarded with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And Martin Luther King Jr. Is described as an icon of the civil rights movement. His life and work symbolize the quest for equality and non-discrimination that lies at the heart of the American and human in general dream. So I have a couple of well, I'll start off with a quote that Martin Luther King Jr. This is one of his quotes. Says, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy." Alright, so I have a couple different excerpts from his dream of "I Have a Speech," and I'm just going to show you Martin Luther King Jr.'s power of language and his oratory skills that he portrays in his speech. And I have 4 excerpts that I'm going to read to you, and I actually got this from a PDF online, so I'll put that at the end of my video, and my citations at the end of the video, and you can find this. I'll put the URLs and stuff. Okay, so we'll start off with this one. "I have a dream that my little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream. I have a dream that one day in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day, right there in Alabama, little black boys and little black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers." Now I'm gonna read through a couple more. Okay, so he refers to the Emancipation Proclamation, and he talks about a little about it, and he talks about how the Constitution and how the Declaration of Independence were good checks for the white people and any person in general that lives in the United States that's a U.S. citizen. And he talks about how he refers to the nation as, in that part, as good checks. And so I'll tell you about what he says. He says, "But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still badly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination." And so he talks about, wait, that's not the bad check, sorry. But that was about the Emancipation Proclamation. That's part of the same area. So this is the part that he talks about. Okay. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check. A check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is corrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. So he's talking about social equality, and he's using his power of language and his oratorical skills in this excerpt. He's relating the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence as the whites have used it as a bad check towards the Negro and African American race. He's saying, just because we're blacks, doesn't mean that the white race has to give us a bad check or insufficient funds. So he's saying that the white people are denying the African Americans their rights and of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, which all white people get those rights. And so he's saying, hey, hold up. We deserve these rights just as much as you do. Just because our skin's black or darker than yours, and just because we're different than you, doesn't mean that we're not American citizens as well. And so, with that, here's my final excerpt that I have. And it says, this is at the very, very end, the last paragraph of his I Have a Dream speech. Okay. When we allow freedom to ring, when we let it ring from every city and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, great God Almighty, we are free at last. And so, with that, I'm going to wrap up my my project here, and I'm just going to say that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a very influential and inspirational man, especially when it comes to the civil rights movement, and he was an all-around champion of human rights as well. So, a very, very influential person in American history, and back in the basically all the way up to 1968 from 1930 areas, and he was very, very influential and helped a lot of people, and a lot of people helped him. So Rosa Parks, Mahatma Gandhi was one of his influences in his life, and other people like Malcolm X as well. So that's basically all I have. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope that you enjoyed my project, and have a good day.